This is a video of my cell transport project. So here you can see my cell membrane representation. So I have all of the components of the cell, and the phospholipid bilayer is represented by both the toothpicks and the buttons, both in their rows. The phosphate heads are the white buttons. The lipid tails are the toothpicks. The cholesterol is the candles cut in half. The channel proteins is the tube pasta taped together. The peripheral proteins are the green straws, both in and out of the cell membrane. And the glycoproteins are these brown kidney beans. And the carbohydrate tails are, or links, are connected to the kidney beans. So cell transport is necessary because it controls what goes in and out of the cell. And if this process wasn't present, then the cell wouldn't be able to receive oxygen or food and wouldn't be able to expel the waste, resulting in the death of the cell. So this model right here represents the fluid mosaic model because it states that all cell membranes are made up of the phospholipid bilayer, cholesterol, proteins, and carbs. So my model contains all of these components by showing that the phospholipid bilayer is the buttons and the toothpicks, the cholesterol is the candles, the proteins is the tube pasta and the green straws, and the carbs are the yellow pieces connected to the glycoproteins, which are the kidney beans. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the movement of particles through passive transport, which is the movement of a substance through a cell's membrane using no energy. So there's no energy being used. So the three different types of passive transport are diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion. So the first one I'm going to cover is diffusion, which is the movement of particles, for example, like molecules or ions, from higher to lower concentration. So the process of diffusion occurs until the equilibrium is reached, which equilibrium means that both amounts of molecules on each side are equal. So I'm going to show you the process of diffusion. So in order to get the process of diffusion, these popcorn kernels are representing the molecules. So they will group together in order to pass through the cell membrane. So they'll all be together in one group and they'll move through, but once they get to the inside of the cell, they separate, or in other words, diffuse, which is why it's called diffusion. Let me show you again. So they'll start out on one side, they're all spread out, and they all just travel together through a little passage in the cell membrane and then diffuse once they get to the inside. So the second method is going to be osmosis, which is basically the same thing as diffusion, except it's with water molecules. And since the molecules are polar, they interact with other polar molecules, which is like water. But if the concentrations of both solutions are equal, they're known as isotonic. But if the solutions are not even, and there's more solute outside of the cell membrane than there is on the inside, it's known as hypertonic, and vice versa. If there's less molecules on the outside of the membrane, then it's known as hypotonic. So I have these orange beads representing the water molecules along with the popcorn kernels. So it's the same process as diffusion, but with water molecules. So they'll all go through this cell membrane and they'll all transport together and they'll all just move in a group, and once they get to the inside of the membrane, then they'll diffuse out. The last process I'm going to show you for passive transport is facilitated diffusion. So this is when a special carrier protein helps move molecules across the cell membrane, which is right through here. The special carrier molecules that form the protein channel bind only to a specific molecule. So high concentration can transport molecules out of the cell and vice versa. It can go in or out of the cell. So this is going to represent the channel protein. So in order, I'm going to bring my popcorn kernels back, which represents the molecules. So in order to get these molecules to the inside of the cell membrane, they're going to go in right here, and they all have their own little spot where they go together. So they're going to start out like this, and they all go in together. And then this red piece of candy is going to be the ATP, which is a form of energy. So once the ATP connects to this, it causes it to open up to where these molecules can go to the inside of the membrane. So I'm going to show you one more time. This is the carrier protein. So the molecules that need to be transported to the inside of the membrane will go inside to their little spots. And the ATP, providing energy, will connect to the outside, which closes it the opposite direction. This connects or disconnects, and these will each go out in their own direction. And that is my examples of passive transport. Part of the video is going to be on active transport throughout the cell membrane. So active transport is when a substance moves through the cell membrane while using energy, unlike passive transport, which doesn't use energy. So there are three types of passive transport, which are endocytosis, exocytosis, and the sodium-potassium pump. So this first representation that I'm going to do is going to be the sodium-potassium pump, which is when 3 sodium ions bind to the protein channel, which is represented by these orange straws, and energy is provided, which in turn drives the ions through the channel. So the sodium ions are released on the outside of the cell, which is out here, and it goes from low to high concentration. So this small piece of red candy is the ATP, which is providing energy, which connects to the protein channel and controls the drive of the sodium and the potassium ions. So now I'm going to show you the movement of these. So the orange candy, which is these 3 right here, represent the potassium ions, and the green candy, which is right here, represents the sodium ions. So in order to get to the potassium to the inside of the cell, just like in facilitated diffusion, they're going to go into the carrier protein, and they each have their own little slot in here. So now this red piece of candy, which represents ATP, will provide the energy, which will connect to the carrier protein, therefore closing it on this side and opening it up to where it's open to the inside of the cell membrane, which is when the potassium can exit. Now, while it is in this state, the sodium the green has to be able to get to the outside of the cell membrane. So this disconnects. So now the sodium in turn goes and takes their places in the carrier protein. And so the ATP, providing energy from this side, connects right here, and in turn closes this and allows the sodium ions to go back out of the cell membrane, and then this disconnects. So the next part is going to be endocytosis. So I can take these out, and the popcorn kernels are going to represent my molecules. So endocytosis is a fairly simple process, and it's the capturing of a substance or particle outside the cell, which is over here, by engulfing it within the cell membrane. So it folds over the substance and becomes enclosed by the membrane. So there are 2 types of endocytosis, which are phagocytosis, which is described as cellular eating, and the membrane engulfs solid materials, which, you know, when you eat, you consume solid materials. And then pinocytosis, which is described as cellular drinking because it intakes liquids, which just like when you drink liquids. So I'm going to have marshmallows represent my large molecules. So they need to be engulfed from the outside of the membrane to the inside. So we can take out our carrier protein. And so basically what the cell membrane does is just take in these, it's the process of endocytosis. And endo means going into, which means that it's going into the cell membrane. So all of these large molecules will be going into the cell membrane. And the opposite, which would be exocytosis, is, well, exo means exit, so they would start on the inside of the cell membrane because they're trying to get out, because that's what exo means. Produces substances for export, such as protein, or when the cell is getting rid of waste materials. So when it was endocytosis, taking it in, that would be, you know, taking in oxygen in order for it to breathe, or taking in water for it to drink, or taking in food for it to be able to eat. When it's trying to get rid of these large molecules, that means that it's trying to get rid of some disease or waste. So it's the same process as endocytosis, except going in the opposite direction. So these large molecules are all just going to go outside of the cell membrane, hence the name exocytosis. So with the fusing of vesicles in the plasma membrane, it is able to release its contents outside of the cell. So that is my representation of active transport.